Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you live. As you can see from the thumbnail and the title of the video, this is Trinitarian Apologists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Isaiah chapters 6 and 53, and John 12:41. It's really part 2 of my response to Dr. White on the use of the text I just mentioned. And before that, the earlier part of the video we'll review tonight from Dr. White and the video I did earlier in this series on Psalm 102 as quoted in Hebrews chapter 1. I've linked that video in the description below, along with the link to the entire video by Dr. White. I will be presenting or allowing, Dr. White to present in his video his position on these issues, right? I realize he may have more to say and has said more, but I'm already aware of pretty much everything he said and written about. The text we're reviewing in these two videos was an upload, right? I recorded it offline. Sometimes I do that. Usually if I don't have time to really go live and deal with other issues, or if I just, it's a certain time of day and I want to do an upload. But I'll try to do live streams as often as possible in case anyone has any questions below. These are texts that I've discussed, not just with Dr. White, but with others for many decades. But specifically with Dr. White, I have publicly debated him regarding these texts. Dr. White and I did some follow-up written debate over these texts, specifically the John 12:41 and Isaiah 6:53 texts we're going to talk about tonight. And then after that discussion, which was at one time linked on my prior website, Elihu Books Topical Index, but which changed when some of the website technology changed. And so when it was upgraded, that index was not preserved. But I will be uploading a paper I'm going to share with you tonight with the material from Dr. White and I's follow-up discussion, follow-up to our 2003 debate over these texts we're talking about tonight. I'm going to add the follow-up online debate material that used to be online on its own as an addition to the paper I'm going to share with you tonight, which also used to be online as an Elihu online paper. And I reference it in many of my writings because there are several. I'm going to add more. A lot of things I still have planned, but several online papers that I wrote that discuss certain issues like John 12:41 and the use of glory there. That paper really represents my most complete analysis of these texts. Now, I've also since then done videos. In my CW Jaw Talk series, I specifically talk about all of these texts in, I think, 2 videos. One specific to Isaiah 53, but another video inclusive of Isaiah 6 and John 12. So I have a lot of familiarity with these texts, as I know Dr. White does too. So what I would like to do is take a few moments since we're live and just say hi to everybody who's in the chat. Typically when we do live streams, sometimes we'll do an extended pre-show discussion. Not tonight though. If there's something really specific to these texts we're going to review in a moment, then I'll talk about it either now or as part of the show. Otherwise, I'll just say hi to everybody, give some other people a chance to join us live if they'd like. And then we'll go ahead and just start my response to Dr. White on the use of Isaiah 6 and John 12:41. Although, again, even though he barely brings up Isaiah 53, and he brings it up in reference to me, but not not at all in a way that is appropriate for everything I just mentioned that I've done. And so I think it's fair for me to go ahead and point that out to Dr. White, since he's obviously still using these texts and teaching other people how to use these texts, whether with Jehovah's Witnesses or just anyone who doesn't believe in the Trinity, right? It's specific, the video he did, and that we're going to watch part of in a moment, to the Watchtower or Jehovah's Witnesses. But Trinitarians frequently use these texts, although I could not find, as you'll see when we do a brief review of my paper in a moment, it's pretty extensive. I go through even the history of the use of this text in the early church fathers, right? Gregory of Nyssa is really the first one to connect this text, John 12:41, that I could find, with Isaiah 6. There were other fathers that reference this text, including Origen, who says his Hebrew teacher told him that the Son was one of the seraphim, which is something Dr. White kind of briefly questions in a moment. But either way, I think the meaning of these texts is pretty clear. Now, I say pretty clear because, there is, if you just look at what Dr. White's going to share with you in a moment, the way he presents it, and that Trinitarians often do, I don't think any question you would at least initially think, oh, okay, and there might be something here that explains your view, why you believe in Trinity, and so okay, because what ends up happening, as you're going to see, is you only get part of the information. And while I don't expect Dr. White or anybody to always present 100% of all the available information, I do expect that at least some, consideration beyond a brief mention for significant aspects of a counter view that directly relate to the exact same words we're going to review, but they point to a long defined difference in understanding when it comes to glory. And I just think that while Dr. White, I think is a nice guy, kind of, right? I don't think he's an evil person. I think he believes strongly in what he teaches, and I think he's genuine in that belief. I don't think he's faking it, Now, I don't think that many of the others that I would consider false teachers, right? Being a false teacher doesn't mean you are an evil person. It can mean that, right? I don't mean Dr. White is like a false teacher out there trying to rob everybody with lies. I mean, he's kind of like, in some sense, right, the scribes or scholars of the New Testament period, in that he's very intelligent, well-educated, but he just believes the wrong things for basically the same reason the scholars in Jesus' day did. Tradition. I think he believes that tradition is correct, right? I think he believes his understanding of Isaiah 6 and John 12:41 is correct. I do think he understands more than he revealed, right? He's clearly aware of what I have done. And again, we had follow-up to our debate, written discussion. And then I did this paper, and then I did several videos. And of course, he's done his videos, and he's still written about it, I'm sure. But the fact is, well, you're going to see, right? I don't believe Dr. White credibly represented our position. Is he under obligation to, extendedly present our view? I guess not, but how about a little bit more than what we're going to see? Because I don't believe anyone who watches what Dr. White presents on these texts is going to come away with a balanced understanding. And that I think Dr. White could still say his view. And it's the same problem we get with other like with governing body, right? It's not like they enforce it the same. Right? Dr. White wouldn't probably require you to believe his view of John 12:41, although he'd require Trinity, right? Whereas, so nevertheless, there's some kind of similarity there. Certainly when it comes to tradition, but let's just talk about what the text teaches, right? We could discuss reasons why, right? We've talked about Sam, and we could just drive ourselves crazy trying to figure out why seemingly decent, or in the case of others, indecent, at least to some degree. Although we hold out hope. We hold out hope. You know what I mean, right? Okay. I don't think it's asking too much to at least get the other side to better dignify our position, right? We've been the non-Trinitarian position and arguments have been for a long time made light of, and I just don't believe it's justifiable at this point. I think we have credibly established our understandings of these texts prior to the doctrine of the Trinity as it's accepted. And so we should be given a little bit more respect, right? I mean, you don't have to like us. You can call us false. We get it. You don't agree with us. You think we're heretics. We think you're following traditions and are false teachers, right? But I think overall it does sometimes seem to spill into a more bitter type of feud than it should be. But it's not so easy. You can say that, but then when you have one side that believes as strongly as they do, right, in Trinity, and you have another side that believes as strongly as we do, one God the Father, well, who's supposed to give in there, right? It's a lot easier to say someone should give in. Well, who's going to do that and why? I would say the Trinitarians should, right? Because their doctrine is not defined in the Bible. Even their use of Isaiah 6 and John 12:41, as we're going to see in a moment. We're going to start in like 1 minute. Even their use of John 12:41, Isaiah 6, has to be understood with Trinity. Okay? They're not reading either one of those texts or any text in the Bible apart from the Trinity. No. Every single text, okay? We've talked about this. They know this, right? It's not like a big secret. It's just we forget, right? Because they don't always bring it up. Now, Dr. White gets into it a little bit. He kind of goes Trinity a little bit. but not really. Even his argument, as you're going to see, and as you saw in part 1, right? It's not so much Trinity. It's trying to prove Jesus is Jehovah, basically, right? That there's this identity that can be established by the use of these texts. Psalm 102, 25 through 27, and Hebrews 1, 10 through 12. We already reviewed that. Responded to Dr. White. Talked about before. I have other videos on it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me. But that, again, we have found that Dr. White and others, but in Dr. White's case, because we're talking about him now and his arguments, he has not represented our position on that text. There are key textual elements that he doesn't bring up, but yet he'll bring up textual elements on other texts, right? So, and he's clearly aware of textual issues. So the expectation is a little higher with Dr. White, as I'm sure he would hold me, right? So while it's important to understand this, because again, it makes our job more difficult. Our job meaning people who believe like I do, and we need to try to explain to people, right? Even Dr. White's group, people who believe in Trinity, right? We have to take the time over and over again if Dr. White and others would just present it's not so easy, I get it, but hey, if I just don't hear any balance at all, right? You want to do a video on Psalm 102 and Isaiah 6 and John 12, well, how about you balance it out and then just say, well, I believe in Trinity, right? Or whatever. Come out on your side, but at least say, hey, these guys, but then that would make them more accepting of us, wouldn't it? And that goes back to the 4th century, right? Arius, Athanasius, all the stuff. We're going to get back to it soon, everyone. You hang in there. More coming up. Sam, we know you're out there, right? We understand. We know you're probably getting ready to launch full assault. If not, either way, we are prepared. No, don't you think about it, Sam. We have been anticipating the return of Sam in his undesirable ways, right? Now we have hope. We've mentioned the hope all the time, right? It's like, but we can't just go around worrying about Sam, right? Nevertheless, Sam, Dr. White, all of you, get yourselves together, right? Sam and Dr. White, you two should be back, at least working more on Trinity together, right? See, there's a rift there. It's not good. Even from non-Trinity perspective, we're like, yeah, it makes Trinity look bad, kind of, but it makes us all look bad. Remember, I've talked about this with Sam. There's a tainting that takes place whenever there's really problems, right? Even with Watchtower, right? Watchtower can do things that make everyone look bad, even if we don't support them, because they're using biblical stuff, right? And we can't control everything. That's just the way it is. But where we can, like with this evening and these texts, we will do so. So let me go ahead and start the program. Let's get into it. I have stuff. If you haven't heard my discussion of these texts and issues before, get ready. I got more. And again, I've talked about this plenty. I will be getting my Elihu online papers back up. I know I've said it before, to the new site. I've been busy. And trying to get the Proverbs. I've got a lot of things happening. I'm doing my best. So hang in there with me. I'll say hi to everyone, and then we're going to get started, everyone. Like 1 minute. I know I said that like 5 minutes ago, huh? It's okay. We mean well. We don't always get it right, as long as we're not intentionally trying to deceive, right? Let's take a look at split screen. Okay, let me just adjust that. I knew I'd move that. Terrible. Got it right there. It's a little bit better. By the way, if you haven't voted in the poll, I know it's sometimes, I've noticed it takes it several days for some of these things to show up on certain accounts, but either way, there's a poll going on. Whatever new section you want to see at the preview of my Proverbs translation coming up, go ahead and vote. It will be the last preview because it's coming up. Oh, it's taking a long time. It's worth it, though, and I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to do it right. I think it's right. You'll get to judge and tell me what you think when it comes out, right? All right, here we go. Oh, yeah. Let me say hi to everyone. Barnabas, on fire as usual. Hick Harriet. Everett Commodore, good to see you. Betsy, praise Jah. Exile Reviews. Bankhead. Bankhead looks like he might not be able to join us. Don't worry, Bankhead. You're with us in spirit, as we know, and you'll get to watch later. TKS, good to see you as well. Okay. Well, let's get going, everyone. If I missed you, I apologize. I'm going to be quoting, portions of the video from Dr. White that, I'll mention this in the start, so never mind. You'll see what I mean. Ready? Okay. All right. Ready? No, that wasn't the Santa Cross, Sam. Don't you think that? I know what you're thinking. No, I had a little itch right there. Welcome to Trinitarian Apologists, Jehovah's Witnesses, in Isaiah chapters 6 and 53, and John 12:41. So what is it about the use of these texts that involves Trinitarians and Jehovah's Witnesses so much? Why is it deserving of this special video look? Well, I've written about and publicly debated these texts and the use of these texts. I have, in my published writings on Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs and biblical doctrine, written about the use of Isaiah 6 and 53 in John 12. I publicly debated Dr. White on the use of these texts, Dr. James White. And after our public debate in 2003, we had follow-up written online discussions or debates, at least exchanges, that were at one time available on my prior website's topical index, and that will be available again as an addition to my republication of the Elihu online papers that I've written, one of which we will be reviewing tonight, because after Dr. White and I had our post-debate exchange, I wrote the Elihu online paper where I provided my most extensive analysis of the use of these texts, not only based on the analysis of the texts and the grammar and the use of words and the application and quotation, but also historically from the early church fathers and the apostolic fathers, use or allusion to this text. The first person of whom I found to be Gregory of Nyssa, that used John 12:41 and Isaiah 6 in a way similar to how people like Dr. White use it. So we're going to be reviewing essentially the second main part to Dr. White's recent video. I'll go ahead and bring that up. It's the same video that we reviewed in part in the precursor to this video, dealing with Psalm 102, 25 through 27, as quoted in Hebrews 1, 10 through 12. I put a link to that video below, as well as a link to Dr. White's entire video. Now, like in the video I linked below on Psalm 102 and Hebrews 1, I'm just going to quote the sections from Dr. White's video that I believe best represent his position and deal with our subject. If you feel I didn't present or deal with any part of Dr. White's video that I show or don't show, please let me know in the comments. I believe I have dealt with these texts extensively to this point, which is why it's in some sense troubling to me to find Dr. White's presentation lacking very important information. And I understand he's under no obligation to fully represent another view, but I would think a proper representation of the best position by the other side would be warranted, especially if you're going to try to prepare your followers, or the people who not necessarily follow Dr. White, but who may, right, in terms of this teaching, the use of these texts, Trinity. If you want to really prepare them, then I would think you should. Now, so why wouldn't Dr. White do that? Well, it's unlikely to me he doesn't know about the stuff I'm going to show you because I've showed it to him. So more than likely, I would say he's either concerned it will neutralize his argument and use of these texts to the point where it becomes useless, basically, right? They're like, well, do I use this or not? Like I think you're going to see after tonight, or if you've read and seen what I've done to this point. Or, so either I think Dr. White thinks that would neutralize the effectiveness of what he's trying to share with them, or it would undermine his own position, because I think in large part, these two texts and a couple others are really critical to the Trinitarian argument, right? They have a lot of texts they use. But I think once you start to properly context and quote and deal with the grammar and textual issues of Hebrews 1, Psalm 102, Isaiah 6, John 12, Isaiah 53, it changes everything. It goes from being what Dr. White's going to present to you as this Trinitarian understanding of Jesus and God, to what I think you can show very clearly is contextually how the Bible presents Jesus and God. Now, Dr. White will say that's Trinity. I don't think so. As I've shown and at least argued sufficiently, I believe, to this point, Dr. White's use of John 12:41 and his emphasis on saw his glory actually means something completely opposite of what he's going to tell you. So let's listen and see what he has to say.
The next one is from John chapter 12. Now, you could be, if you want to, you can be a little less strict in the ordering of your.
By next one, he means after the Psalm 102, Hebrews 1 discussion that precedes this in this video of his. Let's bring the light of God's truth to Jehovah's Witnesses, a video he published 2 months ago on his Alpha and Omega Ministry site. Again, the link is in the description below, but that's what he's referring to. So this is the second text, as I mentioned earlier, in this video by Dr. White, after the Psalm 102, Hebrews 1. So he's going to go into this discussion now of John 12:41 and his understanding of it in light of Isaiah 6. But he mentions me and my view of it barely, okay? So let's take a listen and try to understand Dr. White's position.
Presentation here, but I think this is the best way to do it. And by the way, this is helpful. This really is. People often ask. They'll sit in on one of these conferences.
All right, I don't want to deal with a lot of his circumstantial evaluations of. He actually says some pretty appropriate things when it comes to how Trinitarians can better minister to people like Watchtower people or people who don't believe in Trinity, in his view, but specifically to Jehovah's Witnesses in this video. So he talks about that, right? I don't want to get it, we don't need to hear all of it. So let me just skip a little bit ahead.
They look really scary.
Right.
You're reading in the back of your Bible, Jehovah's Witness verses, more fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies and things like that. What you're doing is you're setting up the context, but you're also controlling the conversation, because a lot of them.
Okay. I'm going to keep, again, he's giving he's giving explanations of how to, in his view, best deal with Jehovah's Witnesses, how to be, again, I think he says some appropriate things. He talks about being more understanding, not in attack mode like Sam, right? And some of the apologetic nuts, right? Now, Dr. White also has some of that in him. But he's more mature and I think more understanding at this point. And his means of attack is more sophisticated than Sam. We'll give Sam some credit. Sam, you have endurance. You're way out of line. But Dr. White has more appropriate delivery, right? And so he more likable. But we still have to look at the teaching, right? You could say the same thing about governing body and other people, right? They could be likable, they could be nice. You still have to have the right evidence, right? Okay, so we're not going to get into all the things that he's bringing up as far as how he wants people to deal with Watchtower people. Let's get to the textual issues, okay? I think it's important, though, to understand that, right? We don't hate Dr. White. We don't hate Sam. We try not to hate anybody. We don't even hate Watchtower. That doesn't mean we agree. It doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we don't get upset when we hear things that are wrong, that are hurting people, that are lies, or that don't present all the information, right? Like I believe we have here. That's just as critical. And Watchtower, and we get accused of that a lot, mostly Watchtower, right? Because I think Christian Witness of Jah, certainly me, those I know, do a pretty good job of being complete. Whereas Watchtower's been criticized for leaving out things, right, at different times. Well, I think we have that here. Unfortunately, Dr. White, we have that with the Hebrews 1, Psalm 102 discussion and the textual issue there, the context and use of Lord, Psalm 110. And here, as we're going to see, really hardly any Isaiah 53 stuff.
John knew about the Septuagint, and he was familiar with that terminology. Ed did not, but there were reasons for that.
Septuagint, for those who don't know, is typically a reference to the Greek translation of the Hebrew Aramaic scriptures in basically the 3rd, 4th century BCE, although while there may have been an official translation to some extent, there were also other translations, and so often they're grouped together as the Septuagint, which is used frequently in the New Testament text, writers, or at least the Greek copies we have.
And the Septuagint will come up here in a moment.
Including Hebrews 1, I will add, as I mentioned in the prior discussion about that text in Psalm 102 on this video. See, Dr. White brings up the Septuagint here with John 12 and Isaiah 6. Well, where was the Septuagint, Dr. White, when it came to Hebrews 1 and Psalm 102 and the use of Lord? Something to consider.
And maybe someone's anticipating that. It could be someone in the channel that already knows where we're going here, and that the Septuagint could become important here in a moment.
It was important in Psalm 102 and Hebrews 1 as well, Dr. White.
But actually, Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be significantly more aware.
He talks about how Watchtower people are more aware of the use of the Septuagint. I'm just going to check the chat real quickly here. He talks about how Watchtower people are more familiar with the Septuagint, the Greek translation. I think that's true, right? It's referenced in our appendix and the footnotes of the NWT. Then groups like Mormons. GL, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. And it otherwise looks like everything's going okay. Flynn, good to see you. Let's get back to Dr. White. Just wanted to take a quick look, right? Because, things can happen when you're live.
Of background.
Right.
And you set up the context. And, you can start where you want, but you have to start before 39 because that's where you want to get there. You can start at 39, or you can start a little bit earlier to get some of the context. So the word of Isaiah.
Okay, we're actually going to start in verse 14, if that's okay, Dr. White. You just hold tight, though. We'll get to the context from verse 14, like I do in my writings, in just a moment. And like I did in our online discussion, follow up to our debate.
Verse 38, the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke, Lord, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For this reason they could not believe, for Isaiah said again, he has blinded their eyes and he hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and return, I heal them. These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory and he spoke about him.
Okay, and that last part is the John 12:41 text. So, Dr. White just read to you John 12:38 through 41, which, as you're going to see, includes two quotations. One from Isaiah 53 and one from Isaiah chapter 6. I don't believe either one supports what he is arguing for here. Namely, that in verse 41, when John writes that Isaiah said these things, which has to be both, doesn't it, Dr. White? These things, like the things he just quoted, Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 6. Now, you want Isaiah 6:1 and a few verses after, but he's not quoting Isaiah 6:1, is he, Dr. White? But you want Isaiah 6:1 and the glory of Jehovah that's filling the temple and the earth to be the same glory as John 12:41. But he doesn't quote Isaiah 6:1. We're going to see that. You just quoted it. Neither one of those quotes from John 12:38 through John 12:41 from Isaiah, neither one were from Isaiah 6:1 or contained the reference to glory that you are trying to connect here. Maybe you're still correct. We got to look at this, right? When we have, but let's look at it again. I want to point that out, though. You just read two quotations. One from Isaiah 53. The other from Isaiah 6. We're going to read them in a moment. Neither one of them refer to the glory of Isaiah 6. You connect the reference John makes to seeing his glory to Isaiah 6. But the quotations aren't from Isaiah 6:1. Sorry. One in the immediate context. The quotation is actually much later, from verse 10, isn't it? So you want us to go all the way back to the beginning of Isaiah 6 because of a quotation made in Isaiah 6:10, together with a quotation from Isaiah 53, and connect the glory seen according to John by Isaiah in John 12:41 with the glory Isaiah saw in Isaiah 6, right? Okay, let's take a look.
Now, immediate note, lest I forget it.
He's going to talk about something not quite related, but in this text. The NIV, and I think, I want to say the NRSV, but I have to verify that. Maybe we'll check the Bible Hub in a moment. He's going to talk about how the NIV, and me and Everett have talked about this, how the NIV uses Jesus, where there's a personal pronoun, his. Saw his glory, saw Jesus' glory. And often Trinitarians attack NWT and Watchtower people because NWT uses the divine name in place of what's actually used in the text. And so it's seemingly hypocritical when texts like the NIV will use a personal name, a proper name, in place of a pronoun, while you're accusing us of replacing a title that's being used in place of an actual name, at least in quotations of the Old Testament where it has it, with an actual name. Well, so let's listen to this, because I'm going to show I don't even think what he's saying here is correct. But this is what's coming up, and then we'll move back to this Isaiah 6, John 12. But he's going to break for a moment.
The NIV will throw you a curve here. So if you're using the NIV is very strong on passages on the deity of Christ. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's very strong. Like I tell you guys all the time, it's a Trinitarian Bible. By deity of Christ, he means Trinity. Okay? He doesn't mean Jesus as a separate God, as the God, or a God. He means Trinity, deity, full sharer, co-equal with the Father, divine nature. That's what they mean by deity. When they say deity, just like when they say God, they mean Trinity, okay? They mean a fully divine person of God. That's why deity is no good. It's not correct, first of all. That's not what God means. Unless you mean a deity or the deity, it would have to be used in the same sense that God is used. They don't mean it like that, though. Just like they don't mean God like that. Word was God. They don't mean the word was Trinity, was the one God. And they don't mean the word was a God like NWT either. So what do they mean? They mean, like I've shown you, they mean in my John 1:1 video and writings on John 1:1. Review of Harner, Caldwell, all that stuff. Hartley, Wallace, all of them. White, Bowman, all of them. They mean a fully divine person of the Trinity. Just like they mean when it comes to the God the word is with, regardless of whether it's a predicate nominative preceding the verb. They mean Trinity. It's all Trinity all the time, no matter what these texts say. Okay? Now, when it comes to this use here, there's more of a kind of identification being made, which is still problematic for similar reasons that I just mentioned when it comes to other texts. But, right, when they slip in words like deity and stuff like that, that's what they mean. And if you don't understand that, you could get caught letting things slip and finding yourself accepting things you wouldn't really accept unless they proved it. And they can't. Now, they do try to, right? Trinitarians, it's not like they never try to argue. It's not like they don't have any arguments. This is one of them. So is what Dr. White's saying here a legitimate argument? Is the glory in John 12:41, is the reference to Isaiah seeing his glory, even though he's going to talk about this name thing in NIV in a minute, and we'll just deal with it. But don't lose sight of the fact that we're talking about John 12:41 and whether or not the glory Isaiah is said to have seen there is the same glory Isaiah saw in Isaiah 6 that filled the temple and the earth, right? The glory of Jehovah seen on the throne in the temple. Or is there some other kind of glory? And if there is it obvious? And if it's obvious, why doesn't Dr. White mention it? Let's find out.
The NIV had a rule that was basically based on the idea that they wanted the level of the translation to be such that if the antecedent to a pronoun got too far back in the translation, they would reintroduce it in the place of a pronoun. So in verse 41, it'll say, these things Isaiah said because he saw Jesus' glory and he spoke about him. But you look over at...
He's going to go and read the text and show that Jesus is not in there. Okay, so he's basically, now, whether or not what he's saying is true, this sort of rule the NIV had, well, I just don't think it holds up, at least not upon a cursory view. And I didn't want to get like too off onto this, but I figured, let me check this out here. Because NIV actually uses proper names like Jesus, where it only uses a pronoun or something that's not a specific proper name. It does that several times. So let me just bring up one of those times. Let's go to the Bible Hub real quick. And let's go to Hebrews chapter 5, another text Everett and I have discussed. Hebrews chapter 5, right? So in addition to John 12:41, everyone, the NIV adds the name Jesus, like Dr. White was just admitting, but he's saying there's this rule where if a pronoun is used, like him or her, if it's used and the antecedent, right, the reference, the pronoun stands in place of a noun, right? So you may have a subject introduced, like Jesus, and then you may have, as the narrative builds, references to the introduced subject, Jesus, as him or his. So Dr. White is saying, look, the NIV had this rule, basically, that if the antecedent, the introduced subject, in this case Jesus, was too far back, then it would replace the pronoun with a proper name. Something that actually isn't a bad thing in terms of, if it's accurate. And I believe NIV is accurate, just like I believe the NWT is accurate in most cases where the divine name is used, even though that's not in the translated text, at least in the New Testament. Now, it gets in terms of the actual, right, there's quotations, there's direct references. So in terms of which types of divine name text in the New Testament you would accept, it might even out a little more. But nonetheless, it's similar to me in that the NWT is using something not in the translated text, whether they have a quotation basis for doing so or not. The NIV doesn't have a quotation basis. It's just contextually saying, it's interpreting, okay? It's interpreting it for you. And in that sense, it is actually a limitation. It's better if the translation actually lets the reader do that type of thing. If it gets confusing, I'm not against it. I'm not necessarily against the NIV's use of a proper name for a pronoun. I just think the criticism that's made of NWT at times, in light of NIV's and other translations' use of proper names where they don't exist, is a little hypocritical. So let's take a look at Hebrews 5:7 though, right? Bible Hub. Here we go. Here's the NIV. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries to the one who could save him from death, right? So, and we know this defeats the doctrine where Jesus is still flesh. In the days of is in the past, and this has to do with something that's over. This is done, everyone. Either way, we won't get off on that other than to mention it, because the fact is, NIV uses Jesus' name right here. But, and other texts do too, but as you can see in the King James, days of his flesh, when he, just the pronouns, right? Because that's what's actually in the text. Same with New King James, New American Standard. But you do get a couple, right? What do you have here? Berean Standard, English Standard Version. Let's look at the Greek text. Hos entais hemerais te sarkos autou. Who in the days of flesh of him, right? So there's no Jesus here. But the pronouns are referring to him. Okay, so why am I taking a close look at this? Well, because Dr. White is telling us there's this rule, basically, that the NIV will use a proper, that he's trying to explain it away, kind of. Unless he can really show there's this rule and they followed it, which I don't think they did. If Hebrews 5:7 is any indication, he's trying to basically get ahead of the criticism. So smart on his part there, but overall, I don't think the rule holds. Look at the preceding verses, right? Hebrews 5:6. And he says in another place, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 5:5. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest. God said to him, you are my son. Today I've become your father, right? So right here in verse 5, we get ha Christos, and we get huios mu, my son, and then just a brief verse 6, and then boom, right? Are you telling us, Dr. White, that the antecedent, if it was more than one verse, is the rule? Or is this an exception, right? Kind of like a Sharp's rule thing, right? A little bit different. We'll get back to that, by the way. Either way, I don't think Hebrews 5:7, 5 through 7 is consistent with Dr. White's explanation. Wanted to point that out because he does bring it up, and this may come up. And if someone repeats what he says about this rule that the NIV had about the antecedent being too far back, and so it used the proper name, so you weren't confused as the reader. So again, one verse. If it's more than one verse, that's the rule, or what, right? Because that's not consistent with what we just reviewed in Hebrews chapter 5. Let's get back to Dr. White and his discussion of these issues.
The Greek of verse 41, tata ipen Isaias.
Oh yeah, he's gonna just read and show Jesus isn't in John 12. Let's skip out of that, right? We're not missing any of his arguments. He's just not gonna. It's not what he's talking about right now.
Well, that's not going to be in New World Translation.
All right, he's talking about Jesus again, the name.
So the point is, for this reason they could not believe. For Isaiah said again, He has blinded their eyes, their heart, and their heart. Let's see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and I return and I heal them. This is from, of course, Isaiah chapter 6. And then verse 41 says, these things Isaiah said because he saw his glory and he spoke about him. Now, when you go back to Isaiah chapter 6, what's that about?
We're going to read that. But notice he only brings up Isaiah chapter 6.
A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses will know. A lot of Christians know. But Isaiah 6, of course, is the calling of Isaiah as prophet, his commissioning as prophet. And if you all, obviously all of you that, well, it's been a few years ago now, and it's silly to think people would remember this, but I preached at G3 a few years ago on Isaiah chapter 6.
He's going to bring me up in just a second, okay? So pay attention because it's basically the only time he brings up Isaiah chapter 53.
And so I went through all of this at that particular point in time. And so you're well aware of what the background issues are. But these things Isaiah said because he saw his glory and he spoke about him. This is about Jesus. So when did Isaiah see Jesus's glory? Well, you go back to the immediately before that, you have the citation from Isaiah chapter 6.
And that is true. But what he isn't telling you is that there's a citation right before that. And then the citation immediately preceding John 12:41 is prefaced by the reason why Isaiah 6 is quoted. And now notice also that Dr. White is going to take us to a section of Isaiah 6 that is not what is immediately preceded in the quotation before John 12:41. You
go to Isaiah chapter 6. You got to quit moving this stuff around. I'm starting to get dizzy. And you go to Isaiah chapter 6, which I will do right here. There we go. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted.
He's reading Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. The quotation in John 12, immediately preceding the reference in verse 41, he said these things because he saw his glory, Jesus' glory. The quotation immediately preceding that from Isaiah 6 is 10 verses after what he's reading to you right now.
Up with a train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So we all know this text rather well. We've seen it before. And you go down to verse 10, and that's where this citation is derived from.
Okay, so did you hear that? So he just read you verse 1. And then he, at the end, told the truth about where the quotation is from. Now ask yourself this question. Why didn't Dr. White read the quotation? Why didn't he read, if he's going to start in verse 1, why didn't he read verses 1 through 10? Why didn't he read verses 9 and 10, 8 through 10, 7 through 10, 6 through 10, 5 through 10? Why isn't verse 10 being read? The one that's actually quoted, in John 12.
And so when we look at this, we go, well, the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord, and it's not Yahweh there. I saw the Lord, right here is Adoni.
Right, and that is true. And the next, right after that, it refers to him by the divine name, which he acknowledges as well. So Jehovah is at times referred to as Lord. That's true. But he's never referred to as Lord distinct from someone else who is Jehovah, like Jesus. Psalm 110:1.
I saw the Lord, Adon. And yet, he is identified clearly as Yahweh. Right here, there's the tetragrammaton, Yod-Heh-Wav-Heh. Now, I've told the story before that when I was writing The Forgotten Trinity, and I was dealing with this text, I was reading the attempted response to it by Greg Stafford, who at that time was still one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He hadn't started his own little cult called Witnesses of Yah yet.
So, that's what I meant earlier by how Dr. White he's kind of like Sam. He's got him, there's a reason him and Sam worked together for so long. Several reasons, I'm sure. Dr. White has a little bit of a bite to him. And, he, as you heard, right? Let's hear that again. He basically just dismissed my whole history of argument around this text as an attempted response, right? I made an attempt. I didn't actually respond, I guess, right? I guess all this I've done, and yeah, you attempted. Good, nice job, Greg. Get out of here. Right, that's Dr. White, right? He sometimes can get very dismissive and do so in a very kind of just sly but cutting way. So where Sam is like right in your face, condemnation, right? But, and then of course he misreferences my group. He calls us the Witnesses of Yah, right? And like I talked about in part 1 of this discussion of this video of his, he clearly has a problem with anglicized terms. Watch part 1 in my Psalm 102 and Hebrews 1 discussion if you want more on that. But in my writings, right, I talk about these issues all the time. Why he uses Yah here? Whatever, Dr. White. But notice he leaves off Christian, right? Listen to what he says again. A little bit of Sam right here.
When I got to that point. I mean, there comes a point where you go, okay, well, so you all have something else to be doing on Saturday, you know? They almost will never take literature from you. And there you go. There you go. So I think that is, or you can start a little bit earlier, level of reality. One of these conversations wouldn't be fair of me. It cannot be truly. They can get into trouble for it. So here you have a New Testament writer that takes a section that we all agree is only relevant to Jehovah. This is being identified as that divine name with unique characteristics that are solely had by Yahweh. Now, here's where you have to have.
Apologize, I just kind of lost the specific part. Here we are.
This, we go, well, the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord, and it's not Yahweh there. I saw the Forgotten Trinity, and I was dealing with this text.
Here we go.
I was reading the attempted response to it by Greg Stafford, who at that time was still one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He hadn't started his own little cult called Witnesses of Yah yet. And
see, he didn't refer to us as Christian Witnesses of Yah. That's Dr. White's style, right? He won't come right at you and call you like the devil or demonized like Sam. But he has his own kind of more sophisticated way of making the same point.
in listening to his presentation,
He's talking about me.
In trying to get around this, what he basically did.
Trying to get around this. You see, that's Dr. White right there. Once he gets like going in his mode of covert covert attacks or digs or whatever, however you want to look at it, they keep coming. He gets kind of on the roll, and there's quite a few here he throws in.
This as well. The earlier Isaiah citation from Isaiah 53.
Okay, so now remember I told you he really only brings up Isaiah 53 when he talks about me. When in fact, as you're going to see, Isaiah 53 is the key. And it's not like Isaiah 6 isn't involved. He's just jumping past the actual quotation and trying to make a connection to support his doctrine and dismissing Isaiah 53 almost completely, right? I mean, he's just bringing it up here and saying I refer to it because it immediately precedes the quotation from Isaiah 6:10.
It could be referring to that, and it's about the Messiah, and he's just trying to find some way around looking at Isaiah 6. And
that's not what I do at all, right? That's not what I do in my writings. That's not what I did in our debate. That's not what I did in our subsequent debate, follow-up to our debate. That's not what I did in my live online paper that I'm going to go through this evening. That's not what I've done in my prior videos on this discussion. That's not what I'm doing this evening. It's really unbelievable when you consider what he just summarily dismissed here. Basically said, I'm just trying to get around the text and claiming that the immediately preceding quotation before the Isaiah 6:10 quotation is the primary focus in terms of the glory, and doesn't represent really any of my like text quotation evidence. And I have like a ton of it. And there's no way. I had this, my live online paper on this subject is not only referenced in my updated edition on Jehovah's Witnesses, but was online for many years. No way. And even before that, again, in my follow-up discussions with Dr. White, our debate, there's just no way he couldn't have a little bit more to say here, in fairness to my view, which he really kind of, attacks unfairly, in my opinion.
Going, well, Isaiah said these things, these words in Isaiah 6.
No. See, Dr. White, what you just said there is not what it says. It does not say, Isaiah said these words in Isaiah 6. You just said that. The text you quoted, and that we're going to read again, literally presents two quotations for different reasons that we're going to get to, that you don't mention. You're just taking the immediately preceding text, not actually quoting it, what you quoted in John, but you didn't quote it in Isaiah 6. You literally took us to a text 9 to 10 verses earlier, depending on how you count it, and said this is the connection. Yeah, when John says Isaiah said these things, he said Isaiah in Isaiah 6:1. When Isaiah quote, that's what he said. That's these words. That's what Dr. White just said. Listen again.
In listening to his presentation,
Talking about me.
in trying to get around this, what he basically did is says, well, the earlier Isaiah citation from Isaiah 53, it could be referring to that, and it's about the Messiah, and he's just trying to find some way around.
No, I'm actually just interpreting the text, Dr. White, and if you actually would deal with my arguments, it would be evident to all. Hence, you don't do it. You're literally not addressing one single argument of mine other than I make a connection with the text immediately quoted before the text you're making an issue out of without actually using the text that's quoted. Everything you've done to this point is based on a text in Isaiah 6, not quoted in John 12. How about that? You're literally making a connection between a quotation that isn't quoted and that doesn't say what you're saying it says either. You're just seeing this glory earlier, 10 verses earlier than the quotation in Isaiah 6. And you're saying, oh yeah, it's that. Forget all the other glory references and what glory means. Trinity, right? Because that's what you mean. You don't mean he's a God or the God. You mean person of God, Trinity. Let's be honest here. But focus more on just the use of these texts. That's what is happening. You're actually not using the quotations that are made. You're making a connection to a section of the chapter quoted and saying that's what John's talking about. When John says Isaiah wrote these words, it says these things, right? And he just made two quotations, Dr. White. For some reason, you think these words, these things, is just one of them. Why is that? Why wouldn't it be both things that are quoted from Isaiah 53 and from Isaiah 6? The actual verse that's quoted, verse 10, not verse 1 that you're making a connection with. Because as you're going to see in verse 10, there's nothing at all having to do with the glory of Jehovah. It has to do with elements related to the Messiah and people who wouldn't believe in him. Just like Isaiah 53, all related to his glory, but not the glory you connect it with, as we're going to see.
Looking at Isaiah 6 and going, well, Isaiah said these things, these words in Isaiah 6.
Okay, that's not what John writes, right? John doesn't say Isaiah said these things in Isaiah 6. You're adding those words by only taking one of the two immediately preceding and connected quotations. So you're literally adding your interpretation to the text, worse than NIV's use of a proper name.
Because he saw his glory, Jesus' glory, and he spoke about him.
Okay, he spoke about him. That's going to be critical here, wouldn't you say, Dr. White? Because it explicitly states he said these things, he wrote these things that were just quoted, not one, but both, Dr. White. Because he saw his glory and spoke about him. And that's going to be critical. As is the other part, you continue to de-emphasize the preceding quotation that's part of the two quotations that John is talking about from Isaiah.
There's only one person seen. Unless, I suppose, I've never even thought about this until just now. But someone might say, well, you have the seraphim. Jesus is one of the seraphim.
Right. So you actually do have multiple beings in this vision from Isaiah 6. The preceding context that's not quoted in John 12 that you're making a connection with based on a quotation 10 verses after this vision in Isaiah 6:1, where there are not only multiple, where God's glory is not only seen filling the temple and the earth being full of his glory, but there are seraphim, other angels. So yes, clearly there are multiple beings here. And as I'm going to show in a moment, and as I've written about years ago, Origen is said to have written in his De Principiis, which has some suspect issues, but nonetheless, it was suspect because of a Trinitarian, Rufinus, Dr. White. And either way, he talks about how his Hebrew instructor identified the seraphim as including Jesus. So the very thing he's supposing people would say, he either already knows they say and doesn't want to bring up the fact that it's connected with Origen, or he doesn't know and hasn't even read what I've written. And, well, here we go.
Maybe that's how somebody get around it.
Yeah, somebody like Origen.
But,
or his Hebrew instructor.
This is where the Greek Septuagint comes in.
You mean the Greek Septuagint of the actual quotation made in John 12, or the part that you're referring to now here that's not quoted in John 12?
And whether you present this or not, I think you should be familiar with it. I think you should know about what's here.
You think they should know more about my view, Dr. White, that you completely dismissed without really referencing any argument whatsoever, other than that I believe it's connected with one of the two quotations that you de-emphasize?
In teaching your kids, your family, and then if you need to bring it into the conversation, then you're ready to bring it into this conversation. But here we have the Hebrew Masoretic text, and here we have the Greek Septuagint. And if with the train of his robe filling the temple, so you think of the regal robe of a king, and it's very long and large and things like that. But when you look at the Greek Septuagint, that's not what it says.
Okay, and before he gets to that real quick, let me just make sure everything's going okay in the chat. Appreciate everyone joining me here tonight. Tarantula Clan, good to see you. Thanks for the super chat. Jason, everybody else. Sonia, glad you could join us. Okay, let's get back to it.
That's not what it says. And in fact, let me see if I can.
He's going to try to establish this connection with John 12:41, where it says he saw his glory. And it's what he's going to focus on here, the use of glory and saw. Even though it doesn't actually say those words in Isaiah 6, saw his glory, it actually says that. Well, you'll see.
How did we do this? Yeah, well, all right. Got to find it first. There we go. If you look at, go away. The last phrase, and someone has been messing with stuff. I'm going to have to remember to check those settings before we do these things because
Okay, I'm going to kind of just summarize what he's going to say here, right? He's highlighting the part in the Septuagint of Isaiah 6. Looks like Isaiah 6:1. Let's go to that in the Bible Hub real quickly. Isaiah 6:1, right? Because then I'll just do this for him because, I don't want to quote him overly if I don't have to, and we can kind of move this along. He's quoting this right here, right? This is what he read. And he's talking about how this part here, see in the NIV where it says in the train or the skirts of his robe filled the temple. He's pointing out that in the Septuagint, right, the Greek translation, the NIV here is basically faithful to the Hebrew text, right? So he's saying in this case, as we know can happen at times, there's a little more information in the Greek. And he thinks this connects it more with what John is writing, and John uses the Septuagint, right? Just like the author of Hebrews uses it, which he didn't fully disclose in certain important ways in the prior discussion, right? But here he's saying right here, you get this word glory, right? Doxa, tes, doxes, right? The skirts, and filled the house the glory of him. So he's saying this use of doxa here, tes, doxes. Now it doesn't say I saw his glory, okay? So he's just highlighting that right here, this tes, doxes, the word glory. That's the same word used in John 12:41, form of doxa. So that's what's being established here by Dr. White, that this Greek Septuagint use of glory, he wants you to see that from Isaiah 6:1. Even though the quotation from Isaiah 6 is in verse 10.
There we go. Fix this stuff.
So he's highlighting that.
There we go. And the house, so the temple, was filled, pleres, tes doxes autou. What's doxes? His glory. The house is filled with his glory.
And the house is filled with his glory in Isaiah 6. But it doesn't say, I saw his glory, or show Isaiah seeing the glory, and then speaking about the Messiah, speaking about Jesus. It also is not the quotation in John 12, and it's 10 verses earlier. So let's see if Dr. White can establish this connection from far earlier in the context than the quotation actually made in John 12.
So there is a textual difference between the Greek Septuagint and the Hebrew Masoretic text. But who is the audience of the Gospel of John? And what translation of the Bible are they reading? Well, they're reading the Greek Septuagint. And so when
and that is probably true, but what he's not telling you, and that I'm going to show you in a minute, is the same Septuagint uses the same terms in a more explicit reference to the Messiah's physical appearance in Isaiah chapter 53 and in the surrounding context, surrounding chapters, as you're going to see.
When John writes specifically in John chapter 12, These things Isaiah said because he saw his glory and he spoke about him. There's his glory, right there. There's his glory. And anyone reading Isaiah 6 in the Greek translation, oh, that's Isaiah 6:1. There's no question about it.
Okay, so again, Isaiah 6:1 is not quoted in John 12. So he is making a connection between the quotation of Isaiah 6:10 and Isaiah 6:1 in the Septuagint. He's saying that when John quotes Isaiah 6:10 that we're going to read in a moment, that he hasn't read other than in the quotation by John. All he used that for was to get you to Isaiah 6. See, he's using Isaiah 6:10 to project you into Isaiah 6:1, as if that's what's quoted. You see, when we get to verse 10, you're going to see that what is written there has nothing to do with the glory being presented in Isaiah 6:1.
So when you ask Isaiah, whose glory did you say? See, Isaiah is going to say Yahweh.
Only if Isaiah said he saw the Messiah's glory or Jesus' glory in Isaiah 6, Dr. White. The same way that you interpolated what John writes in John 12:41. Isaiah said these things in Isaiah 6. Yeah, only if that's what Isaiah only saw in terms of glory. But it's not. And you don't deal with that here or anywhere that I've seen.
When you ask John, whose glory did Isaiah see? John's answer is Jesus. Jesus.
Yeah, and if you ask John whose glory Isaiah saw in Isaiah 53, guess what he's going to say, Dr. White? Jesus.
Now, we can get into, Yahweh does not share his glory with another from Isaiah and things like that, to be very, very specific again.
Yeah, you can do that, Dr. White, but as I've explained to you and others in my writings and debates and videos for a long time, those texts in Isaiah are dealing with the false gods of the nations and the idols. It is not talking about Jehovah, not Jehovah sharing his glory with his divine sons, his firstborn. That is not what Isaiah is talking about. That's how you interpret it in order to support your doctrine. But let's just put that to the test, shall we? Let's go ahead and go to Revelation 21. So you want to bring up this whole God doesn't share his glory with anyone else, right? That would mean Trinity, I guess, right? Is what you mean? That if Jesus has the same glory that God has, which is not the case, we're going to show that. The fact is, though, Dr. White, that not only is Jesus given the glory and therefore temporally distinct from the Father's glory, not only is he a reflection of God's glory and therefore not even God's glory, he's given the glory. He says that. The glory you have given me. We'll read it in just a second. Revelation 21:10, he carried me away in the spirit to a mountain great and high and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God. And in the Greek it says, having ekousan tein doxan tou theou. How about that? New Jerusalem has God's glory, Dr. White. I thought he didn't share that with anybody. Or you mean he can share it with a thing? Wouldn't that be kind of like an idol that has the same glory as God? Sounds like he's sharing his glory with something he approves, Dr. White. You know what it is? It's the bride of his son. That's what New Jerusalem is. Comes down out of heaven as a bride, having the glory of God. So having the glory of God does not make you God, nor does it conflict with what Isaiah teaches. And if we go real briefly to John chapter 17, we can see, as we have discussed many times, I'll bring you guys up here. Let's just bring that up in the Bible Hub real quick. John 17:21. On this whole glory thing, since Dr. White made it an issue and it comes up, and right, they're going to just go from one thing to the next and all this stuff, right? John 17. But when it comes to glory, they've got it all wrong, everybody. They're just using the word again. They're trying to connect this use of glory as if it means what they want it to mean in John 12:41, and that is Isaiah 6:1 glory, when that's not what it's talking about. John 17:22, Jesus, I have given them the glory you gave me. That's why New Jerusalem, who's composed of these followers of Jesus, has the glory of God. Jesus gave it to them. Jesus was given that glory. And this is what Trinitarians don't understand. We're going to talk about this in part 26, Bible and Trinity in conflict. This is an essential difference. This is a difference in nature. The Son's glory is not the same as the Father's. And that's why Dr. White's connection with Isaiah 6:1, which is not quoted in John 12, is irresponsible. In fact, as we're going to see, the glory that John describes the Son as having is totally different than that of the Father. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use the restroom real briefly. I'll be right back, and we'll continue. Gaga and crazy rabbits. All right, thank you for your patience. So we'll get to that in a moment, but let's get back to Dr. White. So you can see clearly, yeah, you want to talk about glory, Dr. White, and Jehovah not sharing his glory? He already shared it. First with his Son, who shared it with us, and New Jerusalem has it. So no, you've just misunderstood those references in Isaiah, like you're misunderstanding and misapplying these quotations from Isaiah. Let's get back to the misuse of Isaiah by Dr. White.
But in that conversation with those Jehovah's Witness elders, what I said to them after I gave them this second one, which I could tell none of them had seen either one. Once again, there's that
And he's basically done at this point, right? That's the connection he wanted to make. We'll kind of just make sure here in a second, but he kind of goes on and talks about his experience with Watchtower people and how Watchtower people, see, they're going to set you up in these ways. Now, they think they're doing you a favor, but they're actually misinterpreting the text. And if you're not ready for it, might stumble you.
Moment, Yahweh. And what is the Spirit of Yahweh? But it's not the Spirit's not the Father.
We're not getting into that.
That is a shot in the...
He's basically done on the Isaiah. That's his whole argument, right? That the quotation from John 12 from Isaiah 6:10 establishes a link between what John writes in verse 41 and the glory that Isaiah describes in Isaiah 6. All right. Now, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this, because what's happened here, everyone, is Dr. White is not telling you the full story. Not even close. And it's really unacceptable when you think about it, because, I mean, there's quite a bit that he is omitting here, just like in the other discussion on Hebrews 1 and Psalm 102. But let's take a look. Here's the paper that I wrote, okay? And that I'm going to have online again for you soon, where I discuss this issue. This is the older version. I'll have a newer version up. The glory seen by Isaiah according to John 12:41. Okay? Now, in the newer version, I'm going to add the follow-up online discussions that I had with Dr. White after our public debate in 2003, so that you'll all have all that as well. But let's just take a look at some of the information that I've had available for over 10 years in this format, and that anyone who actually just reviewed the Septuagint, like Dr. White clearly has done, could see as well. Now, I reference and discuss an article that was written well before mine that talks about the use of doxa in the Septuagint of Isaiah. Now, not directly from the standpoint that I'm coming from, but it's just a study of the use of that word in the Greek text of Isaiah. Dr. White doesn't discuss the findings of that article, and you're going to see why. So the specific article I'm referring to is right here, L.H. Brockington, the Greek translator of Isaiah and his interest in doxa. Vetus Testamentum 1, 1951, pages, I'm quoting pages 24 and 26, but you can get the whole article there. All right, now, this is very important, everyone, because Dr. White basically gave you one option of understanding glory in John 12:41. Isaiah said these things, which Dr. White tried to limit only to Isaiah 6. And even then, he used Isaiah 6:1 and not the actual quote from verse 10. Dr. White never once suggested glory might mean something else, did he? No, not even suggested it. And he's a New Testament scholar. He's a Greek scholar. He knows the meaning of these words. It's unfortunate. And so, quoting the article I just referenced from Brockington, he says, the comparative frequency of the use of the noun doxa in the Septuagint and in Isaiah was therefore not only a favorite one of the translator's vocabulary, but had considerable significance for him. So this is not a small word or deal. This is a big deal, and was associated directly or indirectly with God's redemptive work among men. So I present examples from Brockington's article right here. I give you the transliteration of the Greek and my translation. and the transliteration, right? The English character representation of the Hebrew, and my translation of the Hebrew. Look at how doxa, the word for glory, used in John 12:41, in association with two quotes from Isaiah, from chapter 6, verse 10, and Isaiah 53:1. I believe it's 53:1. We'll take a look at that. Look at how doxa, the key term Dr. White highlighted for us, from John 12:41, Isaiah said these things because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. And the Septuagint's use of glory in Isaiah 6:1, 10 verses prior to the quotation made in John 12. Look at how doxa is actually used in Isaiah in the Septuagint outside of Isaiah 6:1, which is not quoted in John 12. Isaiah 11:3, Hebrew text, Lo lemare einain yishfot. Not according to what is seen by his eyes will he judge. What is seen by his eyes. In the Septuagint, what is seen by his eyes is translated by glory. U katatain doxon krine. The Messiah won't judge by what he sees according to his eyes. He doesn't judge according to man's outward glory. It's talking about human beings being judged in a certain way by the Messiah, right? Fairly. Not by what he sees on the outside, but by what you are on the inside. Not by what you are on the outside is translated by glory in the Septuagint. For what is seen on the outward appearance of man, a human. Isaiah 40, verse 6. We'll just read the translation part so you can all stay together here. Hebrew text, all flesh is like grass, and all its glory is like a blossom of the field. Greek translation, all flesh is like grass, and all glory of man is like a flower of grass. Clearly using glory once again for man's outward appearance. Isaiah 52:14, getting very close to the actual quotation one of them made in John 12, immediately preceding verse 41. Isaiah 52:14, Hebrew text. So among men you have an unusual face. It's talking about the Messiah. We're talking about the Messiah here. This text is talking about the glory of the very one being spoken about in John 12. This is Isaiah, everybody, seeing the Messiah's glory and speaking about him. So among men you have an unusual face, because your form and your appearance are as a son of man. Someone like a son of man. This son of man, this appearance, this outward, this unusual face. This is all outward appearance as a human being. Look at the Greek text. Your form and your glory, which came from mankind. His humanity, Dr. White. Your form. He gave up existing in the form of God or a God and took on the form of a man, the nature, Dr. White, Marphe. Inner nature reflected on the outward appearance. your form and glory. Greek text, adoxese apa anthropon, ta idasu kai he doxasu, apa ton anthropon. Your form and glory, which came from mankind, will be dishonored by mankind. Dishonored, Dr. White. They didn't believe in him. They were dishonoring him in John chapter 12. Your form and your glory, which came from mankind, will be dishonored by mankind. So if they're dishonoring his glory, Dr. White, according to the Septuagint translation of Isaiah 52:14, this is immediately preceding what is quoted in John 12 from Isaiah 53. So if he's seeing the Messiah's glory right before speaking about the Messiah in Isaiah 53, what don't you understand? What is it you're confused about? The quotation from Isaiah 6:10 that you want to be Isaiah 6:1? I know that. We'll talk about that more in just a second, but that, again, that's part of your problem. You're actually not discussing the text that's quoted. And right here, which you also don't disclose, we have the very thing you make an issue of with respect to Isaiah 6:1, that Isaiah saw the glory referenced by the Septuagint. Right here, the Septuagint, immediately preceding what Isaiah spoke about the Messiah, quoted in John 12, says the glory they saw would be dishonored by mankind. Right after they dishonor him, John writes, Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke about him. Here he is seeing his glory, Dr. White, and guess what? Right after this, he speaks about him. Let's go to it. Let's go to the Bible Hub. Isn't this great, everyone, when we can actually sit down and review this stuff and realize, hey, wait a second. You guys are nuts, right? Or, Dr. White, again, is a little more polished, but he's still, in my opinion, a false teacher. And he's right here. He clearly knows that these things are in the context of these texts, right? He is not unaware of these references. He's able to search. He's able to see these things quite easily. And yet he doesn't. Isn't that weird? Let's take a look at the NWT first. Check this out, everybody. Isaiah 52:13. Look, my servant will act with insight. He will be in the high station and certainly be elevated and exalted very much, to the extent that many have stared at him in amazement. So much so was the disfigurement as respects his appearance more than as of any other man, as respects his stately form more than that of the sons of mankind. This is where the Septuagint uses glory, Dr. White. It's describing Isaiah seeing his glory. You know the thing you tried to make us believe about Isaiah 6:1 that's not quoted in John 12, and how you wanted us to believe that Isaiah seeing the glory of Jehovah 10 verses earlier provided a basis for what John wrote in verse 41 of chapter 12 about Isaiah seeing his glory and writing about him. You don't discuss where he wrote about him. You just claim he saw the glory in Isaiah 6:1 that's not quoted in that chapter of John. Yet right here, immediately preceding the quotation from Isaiah 53 and John 12, right before the quotation from John 6:10, it describes Isaiah seeing his glory. Why don't you tell your reader, your listeners, your viewers, your whomever, Trinitarians, why is Dr. White not giving you the information? He clearly knows the Septuagint. He's talking all about it. He knows how to search words. He knows Isaiah 53 is quoted right before John 12:41, and he just wants you to think of Isaiah 6:1 that's not quoted there. He doesn't want you thinking of Isaiah 6:10, does he? No, he didn't make a big deal about that. No, there's no connection with that, even though that's what's quoted. He wants you to go to Isaiah 6:1. Forget about Isaiah 53. Who cares about that? Doesn't matter. Oh, actually it does, doesn't it? Because it's doing the exact thing John writes about Isaiah doing in John 12:41, which is not what Dr. White has presented to us. He has not presented a context for one of the quotations. In this case, Isaiah 6:10 for him. He has not provided a buildup from verse 1 and shown, hey, look, it's that glory from verse 1. No, he didn't do that. Instead, he ignores what does immediately precede verse 10, Isaiah 6, that we'll get to. And he dismisses my whole point of Isaiah 53, quoted also in John 12, and which presents Isaiah right here and in the Septuagint using doxa, as Isaiah seeing the glory of the Messiah, his outward human form that's dishonored by mankind. Isaiah is seeing that glory right here, Dr. White. He's literally describing it. He's talking about other people too looking at him and being like, amazed, dishonoring him just like they do when they look upon him and just think, wow, who's this guy? They dismissed him frequently. Isaiah saw his glory, Dr. White, right here and spoke about him. And that's not even half of it. Let's go back to my article where I present the kind of, comparative instances. And so right here, we just read Isaiah 52:4. And actually, I apologize. Let me go back real quick, because right here, look at Isaiah 52:14. It's right there. Then there's Isaiah 52:15. He likewise will startle many nations. At him kings will shut their mouth, because what he had not been recounted to them, they will actually see. And to what they had not heard, they must turn their consideration. Here's the quotation, Dr. White. It's literally right after Isaiah sees the glory of the Messiah because of his outward human form from mankind. There it is. Who has put faith in the thing heard by us? And as for the arm of Jehovah, to whom has it been revealed? He will come up like a twig before one, and like a root out of a waterless land. No stately form does he have, nor any splendor. When shall we see him? And there is not the appearance so that we should desire him. Dr. White, let's go back to my presentation here. Because again, look, within a couple verses, first we have Isaiah 52 using doxa. 2 verses before Isaiah 53:1 quoted in John 12, where Isaiah sees and describes the doxa of the human Messiah and his dishonored form. He literally sees that, Dr. White, and then writes about him, speaks about him. Look right here, even in the very next verse, after the quotation from verse 1 in Isaiah 53. Look, Hebrew text, and like the root that is from the desert land, no appealing form belonged to him, no glory that we can see, as there is nothing visual that we desire. That's his glory, Dr. White. We literally just read that in Isaiah 52:14. Your form and your glory, which came from mankind, will be dishonored by mankind. That's his glory right here. Verse 2, right after the quotation from verse 1, in John 12, he does not, the Hebrew, no glory we can see as there is nothing visual. Septuagint translation, he is like a root in a land that is thirsty. He has no appealing form or glory. Doxa, we saw him, and he did not possess an appealing form nor physical beauty. That's what they're talking about, Dr. White. The glory that is from a human, the glory of the man he became after leaving the morphe theou of Philippians 2. It's all talking about him and his glory as a human being, Dr. White. Where are you getting Isaiah 6 from? Not any quotation in John 12, I'll tell you that. You're just using the quotation from verse 10 and then totally ignoring the use of doxa in the Septuagint of Isaiah, except for the one verse you want it to be connected to, Isaiah 6:1. And that is not where Isaiah saw his glory and spoke about him. Right here's where that happened. Isaiah 52, right into Isaiah 53, rolling right over verse 1, quoted in John 12. Why is Isaiah 6:10 quoted as well? We're going to find that out in just a moment. But it's undisputable, is it not? The glory of the Messiah is his human form. It's the glory which came from mankind that would be dishonored. It's this form that doesn't have beauty. He took a slave's form. That's the glory Isaiah saw, Dr. White, and then spoke about him. You have it all wrong. You think it's the glory that he describes in Isaiah 1? Because it's a quotation in verse 10 that doesn't even talk about that glory? Isaiah 17:4, another reference. Hebrew, during that time it will be the case that Jacob's glory will be brought low and the fatness of his flesh lean. Septuagint, that day will be an eclipse of the glory of Jacob and the fatness of his glory versus flesh. Again, glory for his physical appearance. Not once referenced by Dr. White. I note here in Isaiah 46, the Septuagint uses flesh as a parallel for man's glory. I go on to discuss different comments made by Brockington in his article. And I point out that only in the Hebrew text of Isaiah 6:3 does the Hebrew text use the word for glory, right? We know the Septuagint adds it, but again, as we can see, the Septuagint uses glory frequently in the context of the Messiah and what Isaiah saw and then wrote about. Here's where I talk about the whole context leading up to Isaiah 6. In fact, since Dr. White, here's where I go and discuss the history. I talk about Philo and his identification of the being in Isaiah 6 as the Father. Talk about references to Isaiah 6 and Clement of Rome. Here's where I refer to Origen. I discuss his citation in against Celsius, and then in his work De Principiis on First Principles. Here's what he says. Here's what Origen writes. My Hebrew master used to say that the two-winged seraphim in Isaiah who cry one to another, say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, were the only begotten Son of God and the Holy Spirit. And we ourselves think that the expression in the Song of Habakkuk, in the midst of the two living creatures, thou shalt be known, is spoken of Christ and the Holy Spirit. And this is right after he wrote, we believe everything, whatever, except the Father and God of the universe is created. I give the references here to his work, De Principiis, right here. So Origen is telling us basically that his Hebrew teacher identified the seraphim in Isaiah 6 as the Son of God and the Holy Spirit. The very thing that Dr. White kind of, chided a little bit and made light of, right? And of course, Origen here says they identify the Holy Spirit and Christ as two of the living creatures, again, created beings. No Trinity in Origen, everybody. We'll get to that more in the Bible and Trinity and Conflict series. But let's stay with this text. I then go on to talk about Hippolytus and then Methodius. Again, this article will be up online at eliahubooks.com in the next couple of weeks. A lot of information in here, very important if you don't have this already. But again, a new version with additional material, and the appendix with my post-debate discussion with Dr. White will be added. Here I talk about Gregory of Nyssa, right around the middle 4th century after Nicaea. This is the first time you get this connection that Dr. White is making in his work Eunomius. This is where the first instance I found in the 4th century, middle 4th century, and it all is just like with Dr. White, right? Trinitarianism is used to explain all of it. And, I go on to discuss the Holy Spirit. Dr. White brings that up. I didn't want to get off onto that in this discussion, though, right? Because we're talking about John 12:41 and the glory that is there described. So let's see here. I think R.E. Brown. Yeah, R.E. Brown even refers to Jesus was identified as one of the seraphs who appeared with Yahweh in later patristic interpretation, right? So even R.E. Brown, well-known Trinitarian scholar, Anchor Bible, presented this view of Jesus as one of the seraphim being related to the early fathers. And Dr. White didn't seem to be either aware of it or even totally dismissive of it, right? So, and then I talk about other works, apocryphal works like the Ascension of Isaiah, very important stuff here, but I'm going to kind of skip through it so we can stay out more on the specific issues related to Isaiah 53, surrounding text, Isaiah 52:14, right before the quotation, Isaiah 53:1, right? How Dr. White has to go all the way to verse 1 when the quotation is in verse 10 of Isaiah 6, which we're going to get to next. But I want to get us up to this point here real quickly, where we're going to be looking at the context, right? We need to look at this context leading up to John 12:41, right? Because Dr. White did what? He just wanted to start in verse 38, right? He kind of kept the option open, but 38 to 41 is all he read. And I'm going to show you why I think he did that. But before we do, let's go ahead and read Isaiah 6, 1 through 10, leading up to the quotation, right? So we've read now, right? We've read the context leading up to the quotation from Isaiah 53:1, right before John 12:41. It's not immediately before, right? Because right before that, John quotes Isaiah 6:10. But let's go to that actually real quick. Because in John 6:10, John 12, I'll bring up the Bible Hub. There's something very important. Let's just take a look at why we heard Dr. White read the text at the beginning, right? He started right here. Let's just do that again real quickly. So John 12:38. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet. Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm been revealed? This is the quotation from Isaiah 53:1 we just read, where in the immediately preceding context, 2 verses before, Isaiah sees and describes the glory, the outward human glory, the glory from mankind that is dishonored by mankind. And then immediately after in verse 2, he again describes. That's the glory Isaiah saw and spoke about him right here. It says this quotation from Isaiah 53:1 fulfills the word of Isaiah the prophet, which had to do with them not believing. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still would not believe him. He was dishonored. They saw, Isaiah wrote about his glory, how they didn't respect him, they didn't appreciate him. He had the glory that was from mankind, that was dishonored by mankind. They didn't believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah from Isaiah 53:1. And then right after that, John writes this. For this reason, they could not believe, because, as Isaiah says elsewhere, and then we get the quotation that Dr. White focused on. He's blinded their eyes and they're hardened their hearts so they can neither see nor understand with their hearts, turn around that I should heal them. And then right here, Isaiah said this. That's actually a mistranslation, right? Because Tauta is a plural here, everybody. And like Dr. White can have a problem, right? These words he wrote, once again, we see NIV, and it's terrible Trinitarianism here. Isaiah said this, right? That's like immediately referring. It doesn't say that. That's a mistranslation right there. It clearly uses the plural, these things. Not these words. It doesn't use the plural for logos here, Dr. White, or rhema. These things, he said. And the reason he's quoting Isaiah 6:10 has nothing to do with Isaiah 6:1. Look, he explains it, does he not? First, look again at verse 38. This was to fulfill. He's telling us right here. The things about them not believing him in verse 37, even though he did many signs and they observed him, he saw his glory, just like Isaiah writes about. Even though they saw those things, they wouldn't believe. We read that, verse 37. Then right here in verse 38, this was to fulfill. And here you have the singular, in order that the word, not words, Dr. White, NIV, that the word of Isaiah the prophet, quoting Isaiah 53:1. So the word is just one of these sayings. It's not the words of the saying. And so when you get to the next verse, it doesn't say the quotation from Isaiah 6:10. It doesn't say Isaiah 6:10 was to fulfill what their lack of belief was. It says Isaiah 53:1 fulfilled that. It says Isaiah 6:10 is the reason they could not believe. Do you see the difference, everyone? One text is being quoted, Isaiah 53:1, as the fulfillment of the things that just happened. The other text is quoted to explain why they happened. Why? Because he's not going to let them believe. He doesn't want them to believe. These people dishonored his son's glory, just like Isaiah 52:14 said, dishonored by mankind. His glory is from mankind and dishonored by mankind. The reason they can't believe is because God blinded their hearts and minds. Isaiah 6:10. Isaiah 6:10 is the answer to this, everybody. The reason they can't believe. That's what Isaiah 6 is for, Dr. White. It's to explain why they can't believe. Do you see the part highlighted under my face right there? That's what your quotation from Isaiah 6:10 does. What are you doing in verse 1 of Isaiah 6? Because Isaiah 6:1, Dr. White, doesn't explain why they couldn't believe. Do you see now, everybody, how he has totally destroyed the context of the quotation in John 12:39 from Isaiah 6:10? It literally introduces it differently than the quotation from Isaiah 53:1 is the fulfillment of what just happened prior to this, to verse 38. And then quotes another text explaining why they don't believe, why they can't. Because God won't let them. He hardens their hearts, blinds their eyes, that they might not turn around, and then he heals them. He doesn't want to have to do that. So he's not going to let them. That's all Isaiah 6:10 does, Dr. White. Okay? It doesn't prove the Trinity. It doesn't make a connection between the glory Isaiah saw about the people who wouldn't believe. Because the glory Isaiah saw, Dr. White, about the people who don't believe the Messiah, who's dishonored among mankind, that glory that Isaiah saw and wrote about that person is his humanity, his glory from mankind. We read it explicitly. You just totally avoided it and have for a long time. And so here we are. Here we are going over the same things again, showing that you don't understand, or if you do, you're deliberately mishandling these texts, and you're using a quotation from Isaiah 6:10 that John explicitly tells us is an explanation for why the Jews don't believe. He doesn't connect it with anything else. He's not saying Trinity, nothing. He's saying the reason they could not believe, NIV, is because of what's written in Isaiah 6:10. So does it sound like he's taking us to Isaiah 6:10, everybody, so that we can then jump 10 verses earlier and make a connection with something that has nothing to do with why they don't believe? Unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable that we have had to do this when all Dr. White or Gregory of Nyssa or whoever had to do was ask yourself this question. Why is John quoting Isaiah 6:10? John tells you right here in verse 39 to explain why they can't believe. Let's go to Isaiah. Let's go ahead and go to Isaiah. We're almost done, everyone. Hang in there with me. I hope this has made it more clear to you what's going on, why these texts are still an issue, how Dr. White is not teaching the truth. He's not being complete in his discussion of my views. He's actually was very disrespectful, wasn't he? Made several little comments there, Dr. White, but that's okay. I'm used to it by now, but I'd prefer you actually address my points and stop misrepresenting the use of glory in Isaiah and the Septuagint and taking us 10 verses earlier than the quotation made for a reason totally different than what we read about in Isaiah 6:1 and the connection that you make, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. And then the total avoidance of the references to the Messiah's glory in Isaiah 52:14 through Isaiah 53:1, including Isaiah 53:2. I mean, I don't know how much clearer you want it to be or need it to be. Let's just take a look, right? We read Isaiah 6:1, right? Here it is. This is the verse Dr. White wanted us all to connect John 12:41 with because of a quotation in 10 verses from now. And he cites the Septuagint's use of glory here, which we have shown is used throughout the context of Isaiah 53:1 for the outward form of the Messiah, consistent with other uses of glory in the Septuagint of Isaiah. And it has nothing to do with the glory of Isaiah 6:1. Okay, but let's just read the context, right? Let's do what Dr. White didn't do. Verse 2, above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. Verse 3, and they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord, right? Morally bankrupt translation right there. My name is in that text, in the Hebrew text. You can see it right here. The whole earth is full of his glory, right? So again, you get a form of doxa used in the Septuagint. There's no question that Jehovah's glory is being described in this vision in Isaiah 6:1-3. That's obvious. That's not what's being described in John 12, though. It doesn't have anything to do with verse 10 that we're getting to. And the use of glory for the Messiah in the context of Isaiah 53 is much more appropriate for the context of John 12 than a vision of Jehovah filling the temple in a glory having nothing to do with the things described in John 12. Well, let's continue. Right? So there's no one questioning, right? That's what Dr. White's trying to build on. He can see, like we can all see, Isaiah 6:1-3 is a vision of Jehovah's glory. But we're not even close to the quotation in John 12 yet. So are we to understand this same glory by the time we get to verse 10 is what's at issue? We just read in John 12:38-39, the reason for the quotation of Isaiah 6:10 is to show why they won't believe. Doesn't have anything to do with this scene here. So let's keep going. Verse 4. At the sound of their voices, the seraphim, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Okay, no question here. He's seen a vision of Jehovah on the throne. He's seen the seraphim. No problem here. So far, we'll say so far so good, Dr. White, okay? Even though we're just halfway there to the actual quotation, okay? Verse 6, then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, after which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. I think this is probably one reason why some of the early patristics, like we read about earlier, viewed one of the seraphim as the Son of God, right? This whole atonement process being done here by one of the seraphim. It's verse 7. Verse 8, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. Verse 9, he said, go, tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Verse 10, here's our quotation in John 12, everyone, right before John 12:41. This is what Dr. White's all excited about. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. This is the quotation. It is totally removed from the opening vision in Isaiah 6 of Jehovah and his glory and the seraphim. Not even talking about any of that stuff. Isaiah was atoned for through the seraphim touching his lips with the hot coal, and then immediately God goes and says, who's going to go for us, right? Who can we send to tell the people this stuff? And then Isaiah says, okay, I'll do it. Send me. And then verse 10, there's your quotation. explained by John as the reason for why the Jews won't believe. It has nothing to do with the vision described earlier in this chapter. This quotation is totally removed from the context and description of Isaiah's vision of Jehovah in his temple and the glory, filling the earth and the temple. It's not even an issue here. It's not even being, we're talking about him going to the people and telling them they have ears, they have eyes, but they're not going to hear. They're not going to see because I don't want to heal them. That's what he's telling Isaiah to go do. He's not talking about glory. Isaiah's not seeing it. It's not being discussed. That was earlier. So Dr. White is trying to tell us that Isaiah saw this vision of Jehovah's glory and then spoke about the Messiah. It says that in John 12:41, right? Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke about him. But he's not talking about him here. He's talking about Isaiah going and warning the people. He's talking about the people. The very reason John says he's quoting this text to describe why the people can't believe. This isn't Isaiah seeing Jehovah's glory and then writing about the Messiah. That seeing the glory of the Messiah and writing about the Messiah happened in Isaiah 53, 52, right into 53 and past 53:1, the quotation. Isaiah 6:10 is about why the people won't turn around and be healed. So why are we taking a text quoted in Isaiah 6:10 as if it's about the Messiah? Because according to John 12:41, it says, Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke about him. This is not about him. This isn't about the Messiah. This is about why the people won't believe, Dr. White. It's added to further explain Isaiah 51:3. As to the arm of Jehovah, to whom has it been revealed? The arm of Jehovah is the Messiah there, being described from Isaiah 52:14 through 53:2 and beyond in that chapter, all throughout, as I explained in my paper. Let's go back to it. So you can see clearly here the context, everyone, of Isaiah 6:10 is not at all connected with the preceding vision of Jehovah's glory. It's not about the Messiah. And where the glory of the Messiah, the doxa, Dr. White, is actually seen by Isaiah and described is in Isaiah 52:14 through Isaiah 53:2. Right before Isaiah writes about the Messiah and after. Isaiah sees the glory of the Messiah, the glory that is from mankind and dishonored by mankind, that's not beautiful, doxa all over the place. He sees that and writes about him. As to the arm of Jehovah, to whom has it been revealed? And he goes on and keeps writing about him all throughout Isaiah 53. And you want us to look at Isaiah 6 and go backwards and say, well, he saw that glory and wrote about the Messiah in verse 10. No, that he did see that glory, but that's not the glory that he saw and then wrote about the Messiah. He's writing about the people who won't believe there, based on that quotation. You're just ignoring the actual quotation, Dr. White, and focusing on verses 1 through 3, when that's not at all why John said Isaiah wrote that or why John is quoting it. John's quoting Isaiah 6:10 to explain why they can't believe. He's quoting Isaiah 53:1 because he saw the glory of the Messiah from Isaiah 52:14 onward and wrote about him and continued writing about him all through chapter 53 and beyond. Incredible, isn't it, everyone? So let's go back and finish this up. We're almost done. I appreciate your time. Let's look at this context, right? So in this article, that we're going to end with this. Look at the context, everyone, of John 12:41. The immediate context of the events leading up to verse, right? I talk about it. According to verse 13, they took palm branches and came near to meet him and cried out, saying, please help us, you who has been blessed as the one coming in the name of Jehovah, King of Israel. John 12:14 records Jesus took a humble means of entry into the city by riding on a donkey, which fulfilled Zechariah 9:9. Then in John 12:16, we come face to face with the first term related to the noun for glory. Remember, Dr. White only read from verse 38, as used in John 12:41. It's in the Greek verb, form of the Greek verb for glorified, edoxaste, a form of doxazo. It's in verse 16 of John 12, leading up to verse 31. Here it is. The students of Jesus did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they were reminded that these things had been written concerning him and that they did these things with him. What is this glorified? It's made more clear by the account involving Philip at the festival in John chapter 12, after telling Andrew and then Jesus about their interest in seeing him in verses 23 through 25 of that account. In John 12, Jesus says, "The hour has come in order that the Son of Man should be glorified." Right? So he's explaining. We're now in John chapter 12, 23 through 25, and he's explaining what he said earlier about being glorified in verse 16. Here's what he means. The hour has come when the Son of Man will be glorified. Truly I say to you, unless the seed of the wheat plant falls into the earth so it may die, it remains only a seed. But if it should die, it will bring forth a great deal of fruit. The one loving his soul loses it. The one who is not concerned at all or completely indifferent about his life or soul in this world will safeguard it for life to continue in the coming age. He's talking about dying, everybody. The glorification in John 12:16 is the same glorification referred to as the hour of him being glorified and the wheat plant falling so that it may die and bring forth a great deal of fruit. When Jesus finishes speaking in verse 27 in John chapter 12, we're almost done, he concludes by deep reflection on what he came to do in the name of God with these words, "Father, glorify your name." Or as Jesus had said earlier, just before the actual betrayal of Judas, now the Son of Man is glorified and God is glorified in him. That's right in the context of John 12:41 and John 13:31. But then more specifically in John 14:13, Jesus speaks of the Father as glorified in the Son. And in John 15:8, the Father is glorified again in connection with Jesus' followers as they bear fruit. So this period of glorification is inclusive of Jesus' death and beyond it to his resurrection, right? The bearing of fruit is also part of the glorification. But the lifting up, the actual sacrifice is as well. And I'm going to show that right here. Because from the time, let's just read it. It says, "This one is said to have become flesh" in John 1:14, "and everything thereafter done to glorify his Father's name." Right, so we've already read about the hour of Jesus being glorified. The hour, everybody. That's him being put to death. That's the hour of him being glorified in John 12:23. He further explains that in John 12:24 through 27. Talks about the Father's voice sounding like thunder. John, that is, in verse 29, talks about it. Jesus explains it for their benefit, not his, in verse 30. And then in verses 32 through 33, we're very close to John 12:41 now. Here's what Jesus says. "If I should be raised up from the earth," form of hypsao, "I will draw every kind of person to myself." Jesus said to indicate what kind of death he would suffer. See, Trinitarians, you don't understand the types of exaltation. This isn't talking about Jesus being exalted to a superior position, like in Philippians 2. It's talking about what kind of death he would suffer, being lifted up in death, on a stake or cross, whatever you want in this case. So stop misusing the same term to mean one thing when it actually means more than one. It can mean being lifted up in death or lifted up to a higher position. And so this is John 12:32 through 33, right before John 12:41, basically, everyone. John uses forms of the Greek word for glory and glorify 19 times. 19 times for glory and 23 times for glorify, more than any other Bible writer. One of the occurrences of glorify is in John 12:23, as we read. And then he uses hypsao in a related, similar sense, right? The hour to be glorified, when the Son of Man is lifted up from the earth. And they're used in a parallel usage here in John 12:23 and John 12:32. And then we'll just skip forward here. I got some discussion here that's very important, though, about Luke and Daniel, but let's just try to move forward to John 12:41. I talk a lot about other texts that aren't really related to this specific issue. But notice I say here all these terms: hypsao, lift up; glorify, doxazo, pistuo, believe, that are used in relation to Jesus' death. Right, look first right here in John 12:37. It says Jesus refers to him as the light. Jesus refers to himself as the light, and that others should use it to live rather than be in darkness, and to live well, and to do so while that light is among them. And then in verses 35 through 36, it uses a form of believe, right? They have to believe in the light, but they don't, as you can see in verse 37. All of those same verbs that are used in John 12 leading up to verse 41 are used in Isaiah 50 in the Septuagint. Look at what it says. Isaiah 50:10 in the Septuagint. Who among you is the one fearing the Lord? He must hear the voices of his servant or his child, just like Jesus referred to in the New Testament. He is not a light to those who live in darkness. Same terms used in John 10, leading up to John 12:41. Phos, paru amenoi, and skote. Light, live, and darkness. You must have confidence when it comes to the name of Lord Jehovah and must rely on God. Very similar to faith. The above language and imagery in Isaiah 50:10 regarding the Messiah, once again, seems to be related directly to the context building up to John 12:41. And then it says right here, right, in verses 7 through 38, we read this earlier, though Jesus performed, this is John 12, they wouldn't believe. And then he quotes Isaiah 53:1. And here we read earlier, right? This is talking about the Messiah. We read part of this from Isaiah 52:14 through Isaiah 53:2. Because Isaiah 53:1 refers to the Messiah as the arm of Jehovah, right? But even earlier, before verse 14 in Isaiah 52, look at what it says. Verse 10, Jehovah has revealed his holy arm for the eyes of all the nations, and every part of the earth has seen the salvation from our God. That would include Isaiah, wouldn't it, Dr. White? What says right here, everyone can see the holy arm of Jehovah, which is the Messiah, according to the verse we're going to read in a moment, quoted in John 12. His servant. Verse 13, behold, my servant will carefully consider things. He will be raised up. He will be lifted up high. He will be glorified to a great extent, everybody. Verse 13, we read verse 14 forward to Isaiah 53:3 earlier, 53:2. There's more. There's so much more. I've just tried to give you the more critical things that Dr. White totally ignored and gave his readers a one-sided understanding of this issue, all while belittling my attempts as attempts, right? Does this seem like an attempt? Or am I actually providing a response, everybody, like I did in our debate, like I did after our debate, like I did before our debate, and like I'm doing now? Look at all this stuff. How can you say he didn't see his glory and speak about him? It's literally all he does from Isaiah 52:10 through Isaiah 53 too. Multiple references to his glory being glorified, same verbs used elsewhere in John 12, raised up, lifted up. All of this, and even more, right? We stopped at verse 2 in Isaiah 53 earlier. Look, it goes on and on, as I said in Isaiah 53, to continue to describe the glory that Isaiah saw of the Messiah and how he spoke about him after seeing that glory. And yet Dr. White wants us to believe that a verse quoted in Isaiah 6:10 to explain why the Jews wouldn't believe Jesus as the arm of Jehovah in Isaiah 53, where Isaiah saw his glory and spoke about him, he wants us to believe that Isaiah 6:10 is to be interpreted by Isaiah 6:1 through 3. As if that's why the verse is being quoted, and it's not. It has nothing to do with that vision. It's just after that vision. And so Dr. White thinks he can take advantage of it. But when we look at the context, when we look at the types of verbs used in the surrounding context of Isaiah 53, in 52, all through 53, and how it clearly describes the doxa. Let's just read this last part. After Isaiah describes the Messiah being glorified, Isaiah 52:13, and after Isaiah speaks of the Messiah's glory, doxa, Dr. White, Isaiah 52:14, and one verse after Isaiah speaks about the one whose glory he just saw described, the same verb of sight used by John in John 12:14 that Dr. White made such a big issue about, the verb for seen and the noun glory. They were in two separate texts, but he tried to connect them. He didn't point out that you have that even more so the case in Isaiah 53. In Isaiah 53:2, it says, we saw him, Dr. White. Idamen, a form of the verb harao, used in John 12. It's only Isaiah 52:53 referenced directly by John in John 12:38 where we have both Isaiah seeing the Messiah's glory and speaking about him in a manner in which John is presenting Jesus, according to John 12, as one glorified through his appearance among mankind. His glory is that of mankind and dishonored by mankind. And that Isaiah, after seeing, wrote about. As for Isaiah 6:10, Dr. White, John tells you what that's for. He explicitly tells you it's to explain why they don't believe. It's not meant for you to misuse and try to connect the glory of the Messiah in Isaiah 53 that Isaiah clearly saw and wrote about him, which is not the case with Isaiah 6:10, because Isaiah 6:1 through 3 isn't even a part of that text use in John 12. Unbelievable, everybody. And just to wrap this up, as far as glory is concerned, right? Let's go back to the Bible Hub real quick. What does John chapter 1 tell us? What does John tell us in John 1:14 about the glory of Jesus, the Word who became flesh? Right here. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory. What is that glory, Dr. White, that we're seeing? What kind of glory is that? Is that the Isaiah 6:1 through 3 glory that you tried to but failed? You attempted, Dr. White. You made an attempt. We'll give you credit for that. But you did not succeed. You absolutely misrepresented my view and belittled it unnecessarily to your detriment and credibility. But you have avoided the overriding conclusion from the evidence of these texts. You've totally misused the quotation from Isaiah 6:12 to mean the glory of Isaiah 6:1 through 3 when it has to do with the glory of Isaiah 53, 52, and that John and the Christians also had seen. Right here. We've seen his glory. Doxa, Dr. White. Tain doxon autou. The glory of, as NIV mistranslates it, the one and only Son. But it really just says glory as only begotten with a Father. The glory of Isaiah 6, 1 through 3, Dr. White, is not of an only begotten Son. It's of the Father. And we already saw in John 17, the Son's glory that's his as an only begotten from a Father, which means he was created. Everything begotten in the Bible is created, but not everything created is begotten. The glory that is that of an only begotten, just like his life, John 5:26, and the meaning of only begotten, was given to him. He said it explicitly in John 17:21 and 22. I've given them the glory you gave me. It's temporally distinct, another essential difference between the Father and the Son, Trinitarians. And right here, John says we saw his glory, and that glory is of an only begotten Son. And the Father's glory, Trinitarians, is not of an only begotten Son. The Father's glory is of the Father, not the one who is begotten. And even according to the text that describes Jesus as the imprint of God's being, the exact copy of the Father's substance, let's go to it real quick. It doesn't even call him the glory in the absolute sense. Not only is he given the glory, so it's not eternal, it's not the same glory as the Father's had from all eternity, which is why it's the glory of an only begotten, Trinitarians. It proves clearly it's a different glory. It's a glory from the Father, but it's the glory of an only begotten, not the Father. It's a given glory, Trinitarians. Same as we receive, same as New Jerusalem receives. Glory of God, Trinitarians. No contradiction to Isaiah. But look, Hebrews 1:3, the text that we use all the time to disprove the Trinity, right? Character, tes, hypostaseos, Trinitarians. No homoousios required or needed. It says the Son is the radiance of God's glory, Trinitarians. Now, we already know about all this part right here. But this part right here, he's the apaugosma of the glory. He's the reflection, Trinitarians. There is not an example anywhere in any document that I believe you can find to show that a reflection is, number one, as old as the original, and number two, of the same substance. Not going to find it, Trinitarians. So we not only have the temporal distinction made clear by character, tes, hypostaseos, every single usage, character, separation in nature, substance, copy of the original. Temporally distinct. Same with apaugosma. Sorry. There's no eternality here. There's no eternal procession. There's just the terms that we understand, and they're applied to the Son in relation to the Father. His glory is that of the only begotten, Trinitarians. His glory is given to him, Trinitarians. His glory is a reflection of the glory of God in Isaiah 6, 1 through 3, Trinitarians. And even beyond and outside of all that, dealing with the spiritual heavenly glory we're talking about, the glory that John says they beheld, that they saw and observed, was him as a man. It literally says in the context of John 1:18, right before that, the Word became flesh, and we beheld his glory, such as belongs to an only begotten from a Father. So they literally were beholding the glory of the Son of God in the flesh, Dr. White. If John can tell you that that's what he and the other disciples saw, we beheld his glory, that of an only begotten from a Father, after he became flesh, why are you ignoring my understanding and use of Isaiah 53 in the surrounding context as that exact same glory that John says Isaiah saw in John 12:41 and wrote about, which happened in Isaiah 52 through 53, not Isaiah 6:10. So while I appreciate your attempt, Dr. White, once again, you have failed to provide a complete explanation of the critical issues of the text that you have used and relied upon to support what I consider to be false doctrine at complete odds with explicit biblical teachings of one God the Father, and Jesus is the firstborn of the Father, the beginning of God's creation. You have once again shown that you prefer your traditions. Your loyalty is to later doctrine rather than to what can reasonably be shown upon a careful examination and a complete presentation of both, or however many positions are warranted, views. You have failed to establish anything consistent with the Trinity. You have failed to understand the use of the term doxa in the Septuagint, and specifically in Isaiah and in John, the surrounding context of John 12, the reason why Isaiah 6:10 is quoted in John 12, and how it is in Isaiah 53 and 2 that Isaiah explicitly is said to have seen the glory of the Messiah as a human, the glory that is from humans and dishonored by humans, the glory that John says in John 1:14 through 18, they beheld. That's the glory being talked about in John 12:41. And if you disagree, it's incumbent upon you to actually deal with my arguments completely, or sufficiently enough to at least represent them in part and not dismiss them entirely as an attempt, which is really all that you made.